The planet Uranus, known as the revolutionary, the genius, or the criminal. Let's explore the possibilities. We will be using Trump as a living example or metaphor on what the planet Uranus represents and the evolutionary intentions therein. We'll be looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly of possibilities associated with this archetypal field. My name is Bryan Colter. I'm an evolutionary astrologer. If you find this video useful in any way, please like, subscribe, share with your friends, comment below so we can keep the discussion going. All these things really help me, plug into the YouTube algorithm to get this message out to more people. With that being said, let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, the headliner of this video is Uranus because it's in an exact conjunction with this full moon in Taurus. So that's really in the spotlight right now. Meanwhile, we also have the Pluto-Mars opposition, which continues over the next 6 months. We have the Jupiter-Mercury opposition. And also of note, we have Neptune in Pisces conjunct the North Node. Before we get into Uranus, let's briefly discuss all these others because they're happening all concurrently. So Mars opposite Pluto, I'm not going to fully dive into this, although it's hugely important. If you want a deep dive into the implications of this event, I did a full video on this about a month ago. I'll put a link above and below if you want to check it out. But the super condensed version is Mars is the war god in an opposition with Pluto, the god of hell. Both of these planets, what they have in common is the word intensity. We're in for a wild ride over the next 6 months. These planets were exact on, I think, November 3rd, just a couple days before the election in the U.S. They will become exact again in January and then exact again in late April. So November, January, April, the maximum pulse of intensity. So there is an overlay of intensity on all the rest of the events we're talking about. Next, we have the Jupiter in Gemini opposed Mercury in Sagittarius. The Marshall-Plutonian overlay of intensity connected to Mercury, known as the messenger of the gods, the communication planet, in the sign of the scholar, the philosopher, the preacher. It's connected to belief systems. So Mercury in Gemini speaking up about one's belief systems. Meanwhile, Jupiter, which by the way is the planet that rules Sagittarius, in Gemini, the sign ruled by Mercury, okay, we have an affinity between these placements of these planets, even though they're in an opposition with each other. Jupiter, the planet of expansion, likes to expand anything it touches. So expanding speech, expanding ideas, expanding philosophies. Jupiter is vulnerable to pride, excess, ego, inflation, okay? So the negative side of this is kind of a blustering, boisterous, self-righteous energy connected to thoughts, ideas, and closed-minded belief systems. So you have, whether it's in the war in Ukraine and Russia, or in Israel with the Palestinians, or Team Red versus Team Blue in the U.S., or really any country. I'm using these as prime examples because they're the ones that are most obvious in the world right now regarding the headlines and such. But we apply this principle across the board where we're in a period of religious warfare. And what I mean by religious warfare is fixed set of ideologies and belief systems. We have groups of people with fixed sets of ideologies, lobbing virtue signals masked as truth bombs over the wall to the other side, hoping to destroy the fixed ideations of the opposition. Perilous, because both sides are rooted in egoism. Of course, there is exceptions, but we're talking about the dark side here. What about the light side of the force, so to speak? Well, there are a select few in the world, and I say few meaning a few 100 million probably, who are, let's say, working with these archetypes with a higher octave expression, where Mercury and Gemini represent, on the positive side, a clearer perception of reality. And for those who have that clear perception, can speak up Mercury style, speaking up about their philosophies that are more in alignment with truth, with a capital T. Jupiter, the planet of expansion in the sign of ideas. Mercury, the planet of teaching in the sign of philosophy. And when these philosophical ideas are rooted in deeper truths, unobscured by one's egoism, it resonates potentially in the hearts of minds of many people, especially now during this Aquarian age that we find ourselves in, where this is the age of information and technology, where these truths with a capital T can be proliferated throughout the world like wildfire, quickly go viral, as they say, in the form of memes or videos or podcasts, or somebody might convey these truths in a compelling, captivating, and honest way. And it helps to clear the lens of perception of others through these viral moments. And in this scenario, it's like we're throwing millions of little pebbles into the sea of consciousness. And since there are millions of tiny, minute pebbles, collectively, they don't just create ripples, but potentially tsunamis of change. That's the positive intention here. And as usual, we will see both of these in large numbers. Although this is an opposition, so the more darker side will become more obvious, but we'll see both. Now, the Neptune conjunct the North Node, I don't want to say too much about this. It's going to distract me from the larger focus of this video. But let's just say Neptune is the planet of mysticism and spirituality. Here it's next to the North Node in the sign of the warrior. This is about cultivating the spiritual warrior by doing Neptunian activities. One of my favorites is meditation. Many of you know I have a separate meditation YouTube channel, and I custom designed a meditation for this very event here, where we try to cultivate our inner warrior king by leveraging the power of visualization in meditative states. If you're a meditation enjoyer, I'll put a link above. You can check out that video. As I said at the beginning of this video, Uranus is known as the revolutionary, the genius, and the criminal. The connection between these three very different archetypes is what famous revolutionaries throughout our history all have in common, is they have seen the world through a very different lens. We could call it a genius lens because they marched to the beat of a different drummer. And they were all agents of change, for better or for worse. And if they were seen in the eyes of culture throughout history to change the shape and flow of humanity in a positive light, they were often labeled geniuses. Many of these revolutionaries were not seen in a positive light, and they were often exiled or quite literally made criminals. So that's the connection of these three ideas. Now let's look at Trump's chart. He was born as Mr. Uranus because he's born with the Sun-Uranus conjunction. The sun represents one's own identity, their self-image, their values, their ego, their life force. It's like the gravitational center of our head, if you will. Anything next to the sun is going to be fused with that person's identity. So yes, he has the identity of a Gemini person, but a very Uranian one. He was born as the so-called revolutionary, the genius, or the criminal. Now, connecting to one's own inner genius, one cliche we can use associated with him is he marches to the beat of a different drummer. Now, whether you like him or you dislike him, I think everybody can agree he's a little bit out there or weird or strange relative to what is considered normal. That's just Uranian people. They're just different. They're built different. They think and feel different than the collective, than the mainstream. Uranian people question authority by instinct. They are custom designed to break the rules, to go against the grain of cultural norms and expectations about what is proper behavior. Now, he's here to be a revolutionary. It's fair to say not all revolutionary ideas are good ones. Again, every front has a back, but he is an agent of change, okay? He was born that way. It's in his spiritual DNA, at least in this incarnation and probably previous ones as well. In fact, very much in previous ones, because the Uranus and Sun is conjunct his North Node. That's the karmic point in his chart, the nodal axis. I don't want to get into that. It'll totally derail me. But he's been working with Uranus for lifetimes. Now, it's interesting to look back over the last few months and observe all the political rhetoric and the slogans, or what I call mantras, that both the left and the right have said over and over and over again as a mantra, as they've really identified with the beliefs associated with these terms. So on the left side, what have we heard a lot about Donald Trump? We've heard convicted felon. We've heard a threat to democracy. We've heard agent of chaos, divider in chief, MAGA extremist. All of these are directly associated with the planet Uranus, the rebellious one. Uranian people are most vulnerable to rejection, betrayal, and abandonment because they're so misunderstood. Now, I'm not saying none of these things are inaccurate. I'm not saying that at all, okay? But there's often projections placed upon Uranian people because they are rule breakers and they question the received wisdom, okay? That questioning might be rooted in delusion. Every individual is a little bit different, but they do tend to get a lot of blowback because they are disruptors. What about on the other side? What are these mantras? Political outsider. Uranus is known as, the exile or the outsider. Uranian people struggle from alienation, feeling like they don't fit in. Here we find the Republican side, political outsider or persecuted patriot. We heard that one a lot. The drain the swamp crusader. What the heck does that even mean? Well, draining the swamp is basically, his battle against what he calls the deep state, the entrenched power of the world that's having a very harmful effect on America, on the United States. So Uranian people, sometimes seek to, again, break the rules. Now, some of those rules in the world are good. We need rules. Regulation can be good in moderation. It keeps people, going in the right way. It's nice to have those bumpers on the bowling alley, so to speak. It can be limiting as well. Not all rules are good ones. Some rules are created and they're very restrictive to freedoms. Some rules are created by people in power, who create those rules not for the betterment of everybody, but for the betterment of themselves. And sometimes the Iranian people can buck against that system. He's also known as the champion of the forgotten or an anti-establishment leader. Same thing. These are Uranian. Whether you're talking about the more dismissive, derogatory, or pejorative terms launched at him from, the Democratic side, or on the Republican side, these mantras that kind of lift him up. We have opposite sides of the same coin, but it's the same coin. It's the same Uranian coin. Now, is he really this great liberator, agent of change? Or is he rather the con artist, wannabe dictator? Well, everybody has different opinions about that. And usually the truth is somewhere in the middle. But we can see both sides. Now, another reason I wanted to bring up his chart is the aforementioned Uranus conjunct the full moon here on the transit chart, as we can see. We can't see it on his chart, but it's literally situated right here on his midheaven at 25 degrees of Taurus. Now, Uranus conjunct the midheaven is happening in his life for 2 full years. But periodically, we'll have what I call triggering planets hit that critical point. Now, a few months ago, we had the Mars-Uranus conjunction happening right on his midheaven. Mars is the granddaddy of all triggering planets. And this is what I had to say about that event. Let's take a look at the clip. The Mars-Uranus conjunction is happening right on the midheaven of Donald Trump's chart. So I don't know what's going to happen. And you can't really predict with Uranus itself because it is the planet of unpredictability. But something big is going to happen. I feel that. And the outcome is going to be that more disruptive, chaotic energy. So there was the first big triggering event. Now we have the moon triggering Uranus on his midheaven, another big trigger event. Now, I admit Mars has a lot more chili powder associated with it than the moon, but the moon is still a triggering influence. And I don't exactly know how that's going to manifest, but it will be big. It will be visible. I said some things about this in the last video. Let's check that one out as well. In regards to a prediction, I got to say, things look better for Trump. So I'm going to go ahead and predict that he's going to win it, but with a big caveat. Because what's left pending here is this Uranus on the midheaven. You know, this symbol, this pulse of shock. Uranus is classic for just hairpin turns. So if he does win, the first couple weeks are going to be very wild for him. And to be honest, I'm not so sure he's actually going to make it into office come January. Maybe I'm wrong, okay? But this Uranus is the part that's hard to predict. And that's just the nature of Uranus itself, because it is the planet of unpredictability. So I don't know how this Uranus will manifest for him. Maybe a third assassination attempt, maybe a health scare, maybe something legal pops up. Who knows? It's impossible to tell. And I hope none of these things happen. I mean, I don't wish ill will or bad things to happen to anybody. But that's the pressing question for me. So it's rather impossible to predict how Uranus, the planet of unpredictability, will manifest in his life during this critical phase of his life, and for the world for that matter. So for the rest of this video, I want to stay on more solid ground and focus primarily on the core evolutionary intention of working with Uranus. And the words I've said really bring us right into the spirit of it. You know, there are words associated with Uranus such as innovation, rebellion, sudden change, disruption, freedom, unconventionality, awakening, technology, genius, radical thinking, progress, unpredictability, breakthroughs. Some of those words could be associated with Donald Trump, but those are just across the board words that we use commonly as astrologers when we're talking about this planet here. But all these words break off from the core center of Uranus, which represents the guardian to your real self. It's the planet of individuation. And individuation means just becoming a truer version of yourself. So as this full moon hits Uranus, now, not everybody's having this event happening on their midheaven like Trump, but it's hitting significant places in a lot of our charts. So for those of you listening who know your chart pretty well and know that this moon Uranus is activating a core piece of your chart, this is how you can work with this energy on a personal level. Asking yourself the evolutionary question, how can I express myself more authentically, regardless of the consequences? You're invited to become yourself during this time. And we're born into a world and trained in a world that doesn't have a lot of patience for people stepping outside the box of cultural norms and expectations. We are all so unique, and we have a genius to share. You know, we have this core of our being, the real self, the divine self, if we will. And then we have cultural glop. You know, nature and nurture is the way this is often talked about. But we are all creators, in my opinion. We're all manifestors. To get a bit spiritual for a moment, I think we're all extensions of the divine, and we're very powerful. Where our attention goes, energy flows. So we're creators, and we're all very unique. We're all snowflakes, not in the pejorative version of snowflakes, but meaning we are all unique. None of us are the same. So a good question to ask ourselves is, how have I sacrificed some of my own authenticity because of others? How might others in my life, how might they have influenced me? How can I become a truer expression of myself? This is in the sign of Taurus, the sign of the physical body. How can I have a more comfortable, body-centered expression of my authenticity and get to this healthy Uranian place of I am who I am? If you like me, that's great. If not, that's interesting. I, in my own special, unique way, am an engine of social change. I'm an agent of change. And that's what Uranus ultimately represents. It's the planet of innovation. And yes, it's linked to innovation and technology because it's those genius ideas that bring about that societal evolution. So this brings me to a couple beautiful quotes pointing to a positive and a negative manifestation of Uranus, and also in part Trump and what he's working with. Here's the first quote. This is from Steve Jobs. It's one of my favorite quotes. Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of the rules. And they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify, or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. And while some may see them as crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. And I said it before, not all crazy ideas are good ones, which leads us to the other side of the coin. And this is a quote by the philosopher Nietzsche. Now, interesting, Steve Jobs and Nietzsche both have Jupiter conjunct Uranus in their charts. What's the odds of that? Jupiter, the expanding force of Jupiter, expanding the Jupiter in each of these individual charts. They share the same configuration here. Nietzsche said, "He who fights with monsters should be careful lest he thereby become a monster. And if you gaze long enough into an abyss, the abyss will gaze back into you." And this, at least in part, touches on the danger of revolution and the potential for destructive outcomes. It warns that in the pursuit of disrupting or challenging existing systems, one might lose sight of their original intent and become what they initially sought to overthrow. And it's a reminder that revolutionary change can sometimes spiral into chaos and becomes just as damaging as the structures it seeks to dismantle. This aligns with the Uranian duality. It represents both the potential for positive transformation and revolution, as well as the risk of unintended consequences. And again, some of those who fall into this trap of egoism, are exiled or sometimes literally made criminals. The revolutionary, the genius, and the criminal. But at its core, it's the evolutionary intention to individuate. I am who I am. If you like me, that's great. If not, that's interesting. I have something unique to share with the world. Many things that are unusual today will be considered normal in 10 or 20 or 50 years because of the Uranian people in the world. But there's also Uranian people out there that are very dangerous and destructive. Every front has a back. Everything has a positive expression and a negative one. It's a matter of free will and personal choice based on how we think, feel, and act in a given incarnation that leads us more towards the one or the other, if we have a strong Uranus in our own chart. This is the core evolutionary intention, with the goal being to expand our consciousness.